Today's webcast will be migrating MVVM applications to HTML5. Just a little bit about myself. My name is Chris Bannon. I am the product manager of Wijmo. Wijmo is a line of JavaScript UI controls. We specialize in data grids, charts, and input. I would say the grid is probably by far one of the most popular components, not only in our company, but in the market in general. So about the webinar today, what we're going to be doing is just essentially sharing our experience that we've had over the last few years of taking some Silverlight or XAML applications and modernizing them into HTML5. We're not going to dig too deep into any of the details. I just want to kind of give you a high-level approach that we take, some general guidelines, look at some of the tools that we've adopted, and then we will show some code and look at an actual application that we ported. And then of course we'll go over the results. Alright, so before we get into the theory or the practices, let's take a look at the before and after applications. So the application we're going to look at is actually something that was developed by Microsoft. It is a MSDN sample application that was written in Silverlight. And it was written to showcase web services and integrating data services into a Silverlight application. And we literally built the same thing using HTML, JavaScript, and Wijmo. So let's go over to a browser here. And the first thing we're going to look at is the Silverlight version. All right, now as you can see, when I go to view the Silverlight version, all I see is a big button that says click now to install. And why are we seeing that? We're seeing that because Silverlight's a plugin, and to use it or to develop applications and host applications in it, that plugin needs installed on every machine. And that plugin is actually not able to be installed on modern devices like iPads, Android tablets, phones. So here we are, we have an application, we've developed it in Silverlight, and I go to bring it up on a modern browser or device, and I see this screen. So I think a lot of people here have seen this, and a lot of people probably feel this pain, and naturally, the choice is to either build a native application or stick to doing web development and build an HTML5 application. So today we're going to look at the HTML5 version of that application. Okay, so here we are. This is just running on my local host. It is a very simple application. I'm going to click Start, and what that's going to do is fetch some data from a web service. Once I fetch the data, I can change the customer, and you'll notice everything below the customer changes based on the customer selection. So it's a relational database. And we're able to kind of navigate and see how this data relates just by changing the customer. I can also change the order ID, and below that you'll see all the order details loaded into a table. Now you'll notice that the data services are all coming from odata.org, and those are actually the same services that the Silverlight version used. We were able to literally reuse the same backend. So that was a really nice benefit. So that's the application. I hope everyone has a little bit of context on what we built, and now let's talk about how we get there. So why use HTML5? Virtually every computing device supports HTML and JavaScript. We don't have any prerequisites of installing plugins, installing frameworks, installing operating systems. Pretty much any device you pick up or purchase already has HTML and JavaScript support. So when you develop for HTML5, you're pretty much targeting the broadest audience that you can. I think a lot of us have almost been not forced, but we're forced to take existing applications, whether they're desktop, whether they're Silverlight, plugin based, and we have to take those to HTML5. And it's really for that reason. So we do one migration, and that application can then run on pretty much anywhere. So how can you migrate to HTML5? So first of all, use a familiar development pattern. A lot of us adopted MVVM from the Silverlight days, WPF, WinRT as well. So having a familiar pattern is going to make life easier on developers. So they're going to be able to fall back on that and understand how to organize things, where to put things. And it's just one less thing you have to worry about when you're migrating, and you have some familiarity to fall back on. The next thing is to choose a framework. So obviously we want to stick to MVVM. We're going to choose an MVVM framework. The framework that we like most is AngularJS. Angular is kind of risen to the top as far as popularity. But we've been involved with Angular for since the early 1.x days, and it's something that's just felt good for us to use. It was almost like being able to build on and extend upon the .NET framework. That's kind of a parallel that we draw to AngularJS. It gives a really nice foundation for people to build on. And then use UI controls with MVVM support for quicker development. So Angular Bootstrap, Angular Material, and then components that we offer in Wijmo that have things like the Flex Grid and Flex Chart that have declarative bindings. And lastly, we want to use a familiar programming language. If you're coming from Java or C#, you're used to having class systems, writing strongly typed code, and you can still have that in JavaScript. And that is available through TypeScript. So TypeScript is going to give you a very similar feel to what you had in C# or Java. It actually compiles to JavaScript. So your source language can be TypeScript, but when it runs in the browser, it will be converted to JavaScript. Okay, so we chose MVVM. Let's look at that a little bit closer. MVVM stands for Model View View Model. So the model is the data for an application. So in the example I showed earlier, the model was our web service. The view model, which is kind of like a middle layer, it is the pure code representation of the UI model. So it's containing things like your controller that's going to perform any kind of UI logic or validation, and it's going to have any object model representation that you need for the UI. And then the view is what you actually see and interact with. Usually that's HTML, with some components added into it, and that's what is running in the browser, and that's what the end user sees. Okay, so MVVM is our pattern, our framework, AngularJS. As I said earlier, it feels a lot like .NET to us, and coming into the web, especially from a .NET background, it's like the Wild West. We have thousands and thousands of different libraries. There's many different browsers to support, and there's no real native framework that gives you kind of building blocks for creating applications. It's HTML and JavaScript are a much more raw or rudimentary tool than what we're used to in .NET. So Angular gives you that. Angular gives you navigation, it gives you data binding, it gives you a component model, and really that allows you, the developer, to jump right in and start building the application and not building up your own framework. Because even if you choose not to use a framework, you're going to essentially write your own. So we love it, and it really is a quick way for us to jump in and rapidly develop applications just like we would in .NET, and we don't feel like we're missing much. And what's the code on the screen here is a component, and that's specifically our component. So you have this really nice markup, very similar to what you would have in XAML, and that is a nice declarative way of writing out components, almost just like you write HTML. TypeScript. So TypeScript is a language from Microsoft, and it was created by Anders Hausberg, who is the creator of C# and Delphi. So if you do like C# and if you have C# experience, it shouldn't be a very hard sell for you to give TypeScript a try. And it gives you pretty much what you have in C# as far as object-oriented code patterns. So you can create classes. Classes can be inherited or extended. You can create interfaces that get implemented. On each class you have a constructor. You have properties for getting and setting. And you have strong typing. So there's actually type validation that's done by the TypeScript compiler. And something that's, it's not necessarily something you have to know, but a nice benefit of TypeScript is that it's compatible with ECMAScript 6. So ECMAScript 6 is a future coming version of JavaScript that adds, things like classes and some other tools that, aren't currently in the language. And TypeScript has kind of aligned itself with that. So you're kind of future-proofing your code by using TypeScript. And lastly, a really, really interesting thing to us is that Google in the Angular team has adopted TypeScript as their source code. And that's, for Google to adopt a language from Microsoft in their new framework is, I think that's kind of monumental. And that just kind of gives a lot of, I would say, credence to TypeScript and how significant it is in helping do JavaScript development. All right. Now let's get into, how we go about porting an application. Now the model is usually the easiest part. A lot of the time you can keep your same model that you would have had in Silverlight because we were using web services, right? So we're able to keep the same web services and just use Ajax to call those, rather than using a .NET library. Not required, but a lot of the time you'll want to make sure that those web services can easily convert to JSON format instead of XML. I think that's just a little bit easier to work with on the client. than XML. So not a requirement, but it does make things easier. All right, porting the view model. So we have our collection view objects, and in this application we had 3 of them. We had one for customers, which populated that customers dropdown. We had one for orders, which was bound to the current customer, and then we had one for details, which is bound to the current order. So this application, loaded those 3 collection views in using web services, and we're going to do the same thing, only we're going to make an AJAX call. In this code, you can see that we're just creating our customers collection view, and then we are populating it using customers.loadAsync. And if we look at the JavaScript version of that, we are creating a Wijmo collection view, nearly the same syntax. We're putting into the scope of the AngularJS application, and then we have a load data function that is going to make an AJAX request and take the return data and populate our collection view with it. Now, a side note here, the collection view is something that you don't have natively in JavaScript, and we did miss that. So we wanted the collection view. That's why we wrote it for JavaScript. So if you're used to working with the collection view, you can use the Wijmo collection view, and it has nearly the same API as we had in .NET. We modeled it just after the Microsoft collection view. All right, porting the view. So what we want to do is have directives, essentially, that replace all the UI controls that we had in Silverlight. Now, some directives we can write ourselves. Some directives are packaged in things like Angular Bootstrap. And then some directives come from people like us. Wijmo has directives like the flex grid, the chart, and input that you can use as well. And we can see we have a combo box in the Silverlight markup, and then we have a data grid. And those are both controls that come out of the box in Silverlight. And you can see we're setting their item source and binding it to a customer's collection view for the combo box, and then we are data binding the details collection view in the data grid. Now let's look at the Wijmo version. Now Wijmo has both a combo box and a grid as well. So we'll use a little bit different markup here. So WJ dash, and that's kind of our own prefix that we use to signify you're working with a Wijmo directive. And then we're creating a combo box. Notice we also have an item source property, and we're binding it to customers. And we have a flex grid where we're setting the item source to details. And we can even go as far as to define our columns in markup as well, just like we had in XAML. Now we're able to do that same thing in HTML5. Now I should note this markup, this really only works in AngularJS, and Angular gives you that declarative markup just like we have in XAML. And that's one of the big reasons we like it so much. If you would just type out these components in an HTML document, they would not work at all. So AngularJS gives you that. There's other things like web components that give you that as well, but Angular is what we're talking about here, and that's specifically what we're looking at. All right, let's look at some code. All right. If you're a JavaScript developer, you're probably not that familiar with Visual Studio, but I'm hoping a lot of you are Silverlight developers or .NET developers, so you're used to it. And just so you know, our entire source code for Wijmo 5 is written by developers in Visual Studio. And as I said, our source code is TypeScript as well. So we have a lot of .NET experience here, and we're really able to leverage that. And a lot of the technology choices we made in Wijmo are so that we can utilize all of our existing knowledge and our skill sets, and our developers can really quickly jump in and build HTML5 applications without having to learn a new IDE, to really learn that new tool set or patterns or programming languages. So what I have open here is a Visual Studio project, and the Visual Studio project just has a few simple files in it. To get an application started, I need this default.html file, and that's the single page that's going to host our AngularJS application. At the top of the application, I have some references. So I have Bootstrap, and Bootstrap is just a nice CSS framework that's going to give us some nice looking things like buttons and form fields. We have the Wijmo CSS, and that's required by the Wijmo components. We have app CSS. It's not doing a whole lot. That's just the style sheet specific to this application. We have Angular.js, and that is the entire Angular framework loaded in. We have some Wijmo modules, so we're loading in the core module, input, grid, and then the Wijmo Angular module. The Wijmo Angular module is optional, so that's if you want to use all the directives that we offer, like the flex grid and chart. Below that, we have app.js and appcontrol.js. And those are two Angular specific files. So that's our bootstrapper for the application, and then our controller or our view model for our application. Before we dig into the rest of that, I would like to show you we're going to open app.ts. So you'll notice in the default.htm I referenced JS, but the file in Visual Studio that I'm working with is .ts, and that's a TypeScript file. And that allows us to create TypeScript, and then you'll notice right alongside it is a JS file. So this TypeScript file is compiled at build time, and it creates that JS file automatically. So I never touch those JS files. In here you'll see really simple markup. That is just creating a module called app, and then where we import any existing modules that we need. We're just importing WJ, and that's the Wijmo directives that we want to work with. Let's close that. Now let's look at our view model. App controller.ts. Notice we still have our app module that we're working in, and that's what we declared in app.ts. We're going to import collection view from wijmo.collections.collection view. Now look at this really nice IntelliSense I'm getting. I can hover over the collection view, and I'm getting all the information that's attached to it. So I get the description, I can see any parameters that are required when initializing it, and below I'll show you a little few more features of TypeScript that you get in Visual Studio. Alright, so now we have our app controller class, and that's essentially the controller for our application. We have a constructor, so this is when it's initialized, anything we want to do when it's being initialized. Inside there you can see we're going to populate our collection views. We're also going to attach some event handlers. So anytime the current customer changes, we need to repopulate the orders collection and details collection. And the same thing, when the orders is changed, we need to go through and update the details collection. I won't go through the rest of the code. Instead, I'm going to show you a really nice benefit of TypeScript. So if I'm in here, I can type this dot, and then I get a list of everything that's currently in my application that I want to work with. So let's say customers, and now I say customers dot. When I do that, I'm getting IntelliSense of all the members associated with collection view. So and it's even got icons for which ones are properties, which ones are methods, and which ones are events. Okay, so let's set can filter, and I'm going to set it equal to 123. All right, I tried to set a property that is a Boolean, and I try to set it as a number. So right away, I'm not even going to be able to compile this application. It immediately is going to tell me there's an error, and it's going to tell me how to fix it. And if I change that to false, that error is going to go away, and the compiler is happy. So that's a small detail, but for developers that are used to things like that, it saves a ton of time, and it allows you to be a lot more productive. All right, so let's go back to our default.html file. All right, now we're getting to the HTML markup of the body. The body has an ng app, and that's attaching the application. And then it has ng controller, and that's attaching the controller to a part of markup. Now in this instance, we're attaching it to the whole body. You don't have to. You could just attach it to a small piece of the body, so like a div, for example, and you can have many of them throughout the application. In this instance, we just have one app and one controller that kind of controls everything. And if we scroll down, we see we have an include. So this is a div with an ng include attribute, and that is pointing to a folder called partials and a file called _plain.htm. So let's hop over there and see what's in that. All right, so it's just some basic markup. It's just a list here. It's got a button. Now when we get to the button, it looks like a standard button, but notice there's an ng click. And the ng click is actually forwarding to a function called start button click, and that's in our controller. Okay, so that is an Angular specific event. We scroll down a little further and we see a select. So this is our drop down, and notice that has an ng model, and that's essentially like an item source or a data source for the drop down, and that's going to tell it what's all the data that it needs to populate its options. And then in the options, we can tell it how to loop through the orders. If we scroll down, we see an input. So this is a text box. And again, we're using ng model, and that's essentially the data binding. And we're binding it to the, in our controller, our orders.currentItem.freight. So the freight of our current item in the orders collection. And then we're going to do the same down below. We have our customers drop down, and then we have some other inputs for the order date and ship date. And those are two-way bound. So if you're making changes in these inputs, it's going to trigger back up and bubble back up to the controller and update the data in the controller. So anything bound to those values in the controller will stay in sync. And if we scroll down further, we have an HTML table, and that is pretty standard looking table until we get down to this row. And this TR has a Angular attribute on it called ngRepeat. It's essentially a repeater, so it's going to repeat for every item in our details collection. So if you'll remember, that is the little table of details that is based on the current order. Inside that repeat, we have some table cells, and those cells are containing some interesting markup, and that these double brackets in AngularJS are essentially just an output. So if you want to render a value from your object model, you can just put them in between brackets and they'll just get rendered out as text. So we're going to render product ID, quantity, discount, and unit price. Those are essentially our 4 columns in this table. All right, now let's hop back to our application just to kind of refresh on what we were just talking about. So I'm going to reload the page. Everything's blank. We're going to hit start, so that's the button that had the ng click. It's going to populate our collection views. Here's the select box for the customer. I can change that. When I change that, it changes everything below. I can change my order ID, and it changes the table details. And you can see the values are getting rendered out in this table using that binding syntax. So every row is essentially an order in that details collection. Okay. Back to default. And then at the very bottom of the default page, we just have a ngRepeat that's creating that list of data sources that we're querying. And that is just showing the URLs for all the web services. That's something, just a utility we're doing just to show what data was queried in here. That's certainly not really something you would put in an end user application. But just to be able to show you that we're using the same web services that the Silverlight version had, we output it on the screen here. All right. Now, here's something I really love about Angular. It is MVVM. So this little plain.htm is essentially just a view, right? And the concept in MVVM is that all these pieces are separated so that we can work on them in parallel and separately. So now, I'm not sure if you noticed, but this is a pretty ugly form. So I've got drop downs that are different height, then this date input, and this is the built-in date editor in Chrome, and it just really does not look that great. And then this table is really bland looking. So while we were working on our application, we had a designer come in, and they were able to just create a new partial view. So this is just a view. They don't have to worry about any JavaScript. They don't have to worry about any back-end stuff. The designer can totally focus on just creating some simple markup that they want to change in this application. It's very similar here, but notice now we're using some directives instead of HTML markup. So we have a Wijmo combo box, and its item source is the same that select box was in HTML. So we're using the same data binding and object model that we were in that plain.html. We're now using an input number instead of just a plain text box field. We have another combo box for our customers. We have some input date components for the order date and ship date. And now my favorite is, instead of that table where we're repeating things and having to build our own markup, now we can just use a flex grid and we can data bind it by setting its item source. And then we're going to, rather than declare our cells, we can actually declare columns. And we can data bind each of those columns and give them a custom header if we want. And not only that is, we can format the data as well, because the flex grid has formatting built in, so we know that discount is a percentage and then unit price is a currency. So we're not just rendering raw data like we were before. So Tim, our designer, has been working on this in parallel. So now all he has to do, or I have to do, is go in and change the include to be wijmo.htm rather than plain.htm, and refresh the page. All right, so immediately you can see it's starting to look nicer. Everything's uniform. All the controls match. We've got a nice combo box here, nice input dates with a drop-down calendar, and our grid is now rendering out with formatted data rather than raw data. So that to me is one of the most powerful reasons to use MVVM, is all these parts are totally separate, so everyone can stay focused on their own task and work in parallel. All right. So the results, porting this application, it is a very simple application. So it only took a few hours to port. The new application runs on desktop and mobile devices, so we don't need any plugin installed or anything like that. A really nice side effect is that the new application is about 15% the size of the original. So the original was over 1 meg, and this new one's only about 160K. So it's going to be much faster because of that. And the new one has a nice responsive layout. We use Bootstrap to create markup and layout, and the components we use were responsive. So we were able to get a nice mobile responsive application as a bonus as well. All right, so now let's talk about some of the benefits of using MVVM. And we kind of saw some of these when we demonstrated swapping out the views. Shorter development cycles. So MVVM separates development very clearly between data, code, and UI, so that each of those layers can be developed in parallel and individually without affecting the other. And really what that does is it minimizes turnaround time. So you can all be working in parallel, and once you have that basic object model ready, the views can be created and bound to it, and the designer can start playing around and declaring the UI without ever having to go into JavaScript, and that's really important. So we have improved reliability and easier maintenance. Another nice benefit is that view models are isolated pieces of code, and that's where all your application logic is kept. So each view model can be tested on its own, and it's really easy to integrate unit tests into view models. So what you can really do is have all these unit tests running against a view model, so before you even give access to a designer to go in and change the view or do anything, you can be sure that your view model is passing tests and that the logic is sound and the validation is functional, and everything's working. So essentially when it breaks, you can point at the designer and say, hey, the view model is working and functioning and passing unit tests. So somebody screwed up some markup. That's always not always the case, but it is a really nice benefit of using MVVM as having a very clear place for unit testing. And then those unit tests become an asset to the project later on. So every time you're doing a maintenance release, you can run those tests and assure that you don't have any regression issues. Improved quality. So I keep saying that a designer doesn't have to go in and touch JavaScript, but it's also important that a developer doesn't have to come in and really touch the view. Now, a lot of the times, you will, but the fact that they're in separate places is really important. And each team member can focus on their speciality and deliver high quality because of that. And they can work simultaneously. We've been doing JavaScript development for a long time. We were doing it in the days before AngularJS when everything was done in jQuery and any UI updates were done in JavaScript. So the designers either had to wait for a developer to implement something they wanted, or they had to go into the JavaScript themselves and try it out. So this is it seems like a small thing, but it really is very significant when you're working in teams. Flexibility. So having this loose coupling between views and view models is really nice. You can also have multiple views for a single view model, and we literally did that, right? We had that kind of rudimentary view, and we were able to take a nice polished view and swap it right out and use it in place. So having the ability to create these things independently is very flexible. And then another option might be if you wanted to make different views for desktop versus mobile. You could do that as well. So you could have some conditions in there that loaded in a different view based on maybe the screen size or what type of device was connecting to it. All right, so that is it for me. I would really appreciate it if you went to Wijmo.com and read our white paper on migrating from XAML to HTML5, or just go to Wijmo.com to read our blog, download the trial. I'd really encourage you to download our evaluation. It's got, I don't know how many, probably well over 100 Angular samples. So definitely do that. And now I'd like to take some questions. Okay, so we've got 2 questions. Feel free to ask as we go here. What was the first question?
What are your plans for Aurelia?
Aurelia. Okay, good question. So I've been talking a lot about Angular, and we do really like Angular, but it is optional. And we also have similar support for Knockout, and in the coming year, or this year I should say, we do plan to do things like Ember support, React support, and Aurelia as well. So it's on our list. We don't have support for it yet. You certainly can use Wijmo in Aurelia today. There's no limitation there. We just don't have components created for it yet.
Angular 2.
Angular 2. So yeah, we went over Angular 1 stuff today, and obviously that's what we're shipping today is Angular 1 directives. But if you're following along on our blog, you'll see that we already have a huge leap forward in Angular 2. We have an Angular 2 Explorer, so that's a full application using a lot of our directives, or they're called components now in Angular 2, not directives. So we have like the flex grid, flex chart, and input components being used in there, and we absolutely will fully support Angular 2. That's what is in development. That's what our main focus is right now. And then after our Angular 2 support is done, we will move on to some other frameworks to support as well.
Okay, how does Angular compare to Prism?
Angular and Prism.
So they're a Silverlight MVVM C# user with the Prism framework.
Oh, okay. That's a very good question. I don't know. I don't know exactly. I'm not that familiar with Prism, so I would have to look at that to be able to give a good answer. So I really don't know. I'll follow back up with you on that one, though. That's an interesting question.
There was one person that recommended not using the $ scope and that we should be using the controller as syntax.
Yeah. That's a very good point as well. In Angular 1, there is scope is essentially the shared data in the view model that anything can be bound to. And in my code, I was using scope dot to assign things to the scope. And that is kind of, it's not a bad thing to do, but you should move away from that now. You should use controller as syntax, and that's going to make it much easier for you to move to Angular 2 as well, because scope is, there is no scope concept in Angular 2. Is that it for questions? All right. Well, thank you all very much for joining. I really appreciate your time. I hope you learned something from our experience. Oh, we have one more question.
Can I see what I'm designing while writing XAML? I'm not sure I understand the question.
All right.
Can I see what I'm designing while writing XAML in Angular?
All right. Our last question. Can I see what I am designing while writing XAML? Like, like almost like seeing it in a WYSIWYG editor or something. No, there's no like design surface that you have for Angular, and that is a gap that is not really been filled yet. There's no real good WYSIWYG editors for Angular or really HTML. But if you're familiar with Markup and if you're familiar with writing XAML, I think you'll feel very familiar in writing HTML and using directives. But I would say there are some nice utilities that as soon as you save an HTML file, it'll refresh your browser so that you can see immediate changes. Those are kind of cool. And then also the browser dev tools. You can go in and customize things in there to see how they look and then apply those edits back into the HTML file. All right, let's wrap it up then. If you do have any questions, feel free to send those an email. We'll be happy to answer them after the fact. And definitely go check out wijmo.com and spend some time in the blogs and download the evaluation to start playing around with Angular and even Angular 2 now. Thanks a lot.